Hello and welcome to the Harrogate podcast with me, Andrew Gray. Now this is the very first in a series of Harrogate podcasts related to Harrogate business people and charities and events that are going on. Now I'm absolutely delighted that the first person who's accepted my challenge to be interviewed by me for the Harrogate podcast is Damian Bramley. Good afternoon, Damian.
Good afternoon, Andrew.
Now Damian is a very well-known photographer in the local area. He specialises in wedding photography and commercial photography. Now he tells me he's very good. I hear from lots of other people he's very good, but today I want him to convince our audience that he is as good as he says that he is. Can you do that today for us, Damian?
Of course.
Good. So Damian, tell us all about Damian Bramley, about your business, and what makes you different from all the other photographers out there, because frankly there's lots of you. You're 10 a penny, aren't you?
Yes, indeed. There is an awful lot of wedding photographers and general photographers out there. It's a very, very competitive industry. Now I've been running my business for just over 14 years. Originally started in IT and chose to make a career change back in 2004.
So Damian, when did you start DJB photography?
Well, it was in January 2004. I'd actually decided I wanted to change my career back in 2002 and went to it was a bit of a strange time, really. I was working in IT. I'd sort of fallen into IT, but it wasn't really quite what I wanted to do. But it took me an awful long time to decide. Up until that point, I was quite lost. But when I realised it was photography that I wanted to do, it was like it sounds corny to say, but it was like a light bulb moment. It was that sort of realisation that suddenly I felt really comfortable, and that's what I knew I wanted to do. So I actually, at the time, I went back. Well, I went to evening class actually in York, and there were 2 or 3 different photography courses, but I chose one called The Art of Photography. It wasn't technical at all, it was more creative, and I did a year of evening courses. And
whilst also holding a full-time job down as well?
Yeah, but this was an evening course, so it wasn't too bad. And it was after that I then decided that I actually thought I'd better get some qualification in this. So I applied to Harrogate College, and Harrogate College had a very good photography course and photography department there. And I got an interview, and I remember going to the interview knowing that really I couldn't do this. I worked full-time in IT, a very stressful job, quite high-powered job, and I went to the interview wanting to find out more about the course, but really deep down knowing that actually if I got offered a place I wouldn't be able to take it. Now I think there was about 120 people applied for 30 places, and went along and had the interview with the course tutor, and we just clicked, and so much so the interview lasted an awful lot longer than it should, and he offered me a place there, and I left thinking I really want to do this, knowing full well that I worked full time, and I just thought, how on earth am I going to be able to do this?
So what did you decide then?
Well, I went back to my director at work and explained to her about the photography, and we came up with a plan where I would basically work full time in 4 days and have a day off to basically go to college, and also I'd use my annual leave, and I could build up time off in lieu in order to be able to go to this college course, and I did that for 2 years. But it was actually during my first year I got some work experience with a photographer, a wedding photographer actually, which I went for the interview for, and I got the job, and I worked for him for a few months, and he then helped me set up my business in sort of between January and June 2004. So it was a really difficult time, really hectic time, because I was working basically full time in 4 days. I was attending a college course and doing all the work associated with that. I was trying to set up a business, and I was doing some work experience with a wedding photographer. So it was absolutely manic, and I did that for sort of 2 years, and I set up my business and finished the college course. Continued for about a year, still working in IT, doing photography 1 day a week, but it just got to a point where I had that much photography work, I couldn't manage the two, and I ended up with a meeting with my director, and she said to me, "We want you to go back to working 5 days a week." And I said, I can't. I said, I've got that much work on in photography. And I started talking about photography, and I spoke to her for about an hour about photography, and she could see that I was really passionate about it. And at the end, she just said, I think you need to go away and think about what you want to do. And this was on a Friday, and on the Monday I handed him a notice, and I just made that jump. And it was I either do it now or I don't do it at all. But I realised that, you know, I was really passionate about it, and I needed to actually devote my time to it to actually get it going.
And clearly that's been the right decision, because you've
absolutely
sustained a very successful business,
Yeah.
serviced probably hundreds of clients over a large geographical area.
Yeah.
When you were making that decision back in 2002 to 4, surely it was easier to move into photography, because I would have guessed there's a lot of IT sort of overlap, in my head at least, between the job that you probably had and photography. I imagine photography is going much more digital, and IT skills were very useful for a job as a wedding photographer, commercial photographer. Is that right?
Absolutely. Although at the time when I started college, my camera was a film camera, and the college course was devoted sort of significantly towards film. There was a little touch on digital, because it was sort of it was about at that time, but the quality wasn't quite there. But it wasn't long after I started in wedding photography, and I started photographing weddings in film. Digital sort of really came on, and the quality was there, and so the move to digital was quite easy, and certainly having the skills in IT made that transition very easy. So the IT stood me in very good stead for working in photography. It really did.
Now, during those years that have elapsed since your move into this sector, you've seen the rise of the iPhone, the smartphone, and everybody now has a 5 megapixel, 6 megapixel camera. Has that, do you think, in any way tainted your sector, or actually made it stand out more from the average or to rudimentary rubbish photographs that the likes of me and my kids produce?
Well, I think nowadays so many people are taking photographs that there is more of a tendency for people to want to take photographs themselves rather than employ the services of a professional. And you do find this in certainly in wedding photography. I know some venues in particular where they used to know the photographer that was coming to photograph the weddings. You know, there'd be regular photographers coming every single week, whereas now there's a lot more where the people actually photographing the wedding are friends of the couple, because he's got a decent SLR camera and he can take decent photographs. And I think photography has become a lot more accessible, and because it's more affordable, and because people are taking photographs on their iPhone, they're taking a lot more of them. And yeah, it is more difficult to get across just how much better it can be, and to use a professional. I don't know whether or not the expectation has changed in that people's standards have lowered, I suppose, because they're just happy with what they take on a phone. I don't know, but certainly it has. Yeah, I think there's been a lot of emphasis on megapixels, and certainly, you know, if a phone can take 12 megapixels, it's seen as being a really good camera. That's just, to some extent, it can be the case, but actually a lot of the quality is in the lens. If you've got a really, really good quality lens, it doesn't really matter so much about the megapixels. So if you've got a 6 megapixel camera with a fantastic lens, you'll get a fantastic image. Whereas, you know, you could have a 36 megapixel camera with a very poor lens and you still get a poor picture.
And of course, with the weddings, surely part of the skill of being a wedding photographer is acting a little bit like a ninja, so that no one can see you on the day and you're not interfering with proceedings. How do you actually go about, I know, getting the right shot, but also not upsetting the bride in particular, bridezilla, the groom, the family, so on? How do you do that?
Yeah, well, I mean, my style of photography is what I class as a very natural style. It's a discreet, unobtrusive approach to wedding photography. So a lot of it is staying in the background and capturing what happens. And it's usually a full day, right from bride's prep through to first dance. But a lot of the way in which I work and the way in which I know how a wedding is going to evolve that day has come about through having had a meeting with the couple prior to the wedding. I also insist that we do a pre-wedding photo shoot.
Would that be sorry to trouble the pre-wedding photo shoots? I never had one when we got married. Would that be some months before the event? On the day of the event? I don't understand.
Yeah, I'd recommend sort of 6 to 8 weeks before a wedding.
Okay.
Usually the majority of the wedding's been sorted out, they know the timings for the day, so we can discuss all that at the pre-wedding photo shoot. But a pre-wedding photo shoot is a shoot where the couple are in sort of smart casual clothes. We go to a location they probably like going to, so somewhere like Fountains Abbey, Brimham Rocks, Castle Howard. And it lasts about an hour and a half to 2 hours, and it gets them used to having the photograph taken, but it also gets me used to how a couple are together and how much direction or how little direction they need. And I can also give them hints and tips on what looks natural, so that on the wedding day they are much more used to having the photograph taken, they're much more used to me being there, and they're much more relaxed about it. So when the wedding is actually taking place, I don't have to keep sort of interrupting them and saying, can you just do this, can you just do that? We've already discussed all of that. So for the most part, they just act naturally, or it's seen to everybody else that they act naturally, and they've sort of got used to it, I suppose.
Well, this question may seem somewhat trite, but I'll ask it anyway. Okay. Do you have to dress in suits akin to how the groom is dressing, or do you have your own sort of wedding-y sort of attire which you trot out to every wedding that you go to?
Yeah, no, I don't tend to wear a suit, mainly because of the type of photography I do. I've got to have plenty of freedom in which to work, and I do find at times a suit can be quite restrictive in being able to do that. But I do tend to dress certainly very smartly for a wedding, but quite discreet. Obviously, I don't want to stand out. I want to be very much in the background, so that it isn't known that I'm just, it's not my day. I don't class a wedding day as a photo shoot to be dominated by a photographer. It's very much their day. It's the couple's day. It's a wedding day, and it's for them to enjoy and for them to look back on and see it as a wedding day and not a photo shoot. So for me, it's my job to remain discreet, but still to capture the photograph so that when they look back through it, it's a fantastic record of the day. And a lot of the time you get comments like, I didn't realise you took that, I didn't realise you were there, and that to me is what it's all about, really, to be honest. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I've known you for a few years, and you've done some of the profile shots of some of the lawyers here.
Yes.
When I think of wedding photographers, I think of some of the dreadful ones that I've seen in the way. And knowing you as I do, you're quite a sort of shyer or more calmly spoken person. I can't imagine you jumping in the way and making it all about you. But I have been to weddings where people do that, and it's very, very annoying. Maybe their shots are great, but I'll tell you, as a part of the audience, it's utterly distracting.
Yeah, well, it has a knock-on effect as well, because unfortunately, you'll find that the registrars and the vicars will have seen this type of behaviour as well. So when I go along to a wedding and introduce myself, very often the response from them is, "Oh, you're the photographer." Absolutely no photographs to be taken whatsoever, which then puts me in a very, very difficult position. But very often when I've photographed a wedding, a vicar or the registrar will have got to know me. So when I photograph that next wedding, they already know how I work. And now, certainly in North Yorkshire, registrar-wise, they know me, so they're more than happy. And it's just like, you take whatever you want, because it's very, very discreet, and I don't interrupt the ceremony at all.
I can imagine. Do you have any idea how many weddings you may have been a photographer for? How many lucky days that you have been there?
It's several hundred. It's certainly several hundred. I mean, I sort of limit the number of weddings I photograph each year to 30. Simply because I want to devote as much time as I possibly can to a wedding. There's about 4 or 5 days worth of work in a wedding, right from initially seeing the couple to pre-wedding photo shoot, to photographing the wedding, to sorting out their album design and creating the album, to however meetings that they need in order to be able to get that album sorted out, and then ultimately handing over the album. So there's quite a bit of work involved in that, and 30 a year is more than ample, really.
Yeah, I can imagine. That seems like a full-time job, almost 365 days.
Absolutely.
For some.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned albums. When you said you're producing these albums for the happy couple, are these on a USB stick, a CD, or actually it's a physical album that most people request?
Yes. It for the most part, when I talk about albums, it's a physical album. and I tend to get my albums from a company called Queensberry in New Zealand, and I've always got my albums from Queensberry in New Zealand. Now when I first started in wedding photography, you had to be recommended to them by another photographer, another client of theirs, and you had to pay £250. And it was only at that point would they then sort of allow you to become a client of theirs. It's a little different nowadays, but they are seen as the Rolls Royce of the wedding industry. The design of albums is very timeless, but everything's bespoke. There's about 50 different cover materials a couple can choose from. They can choose the page colour, and obviously I create a design for them which is very bespoke. So they choose the images that go into that album, and I create the design, and they can make any changes they want to make to that design. So every single album is unique, but they are very timeless, and the quality of them is such that if anybody were to ever have a problem with the album, just bring it back and we'd sort that out, no problem at all. And I've not seen any other album manufacturer that creates albums quite as stylishly as Queensberry, so I'm not really...
So are you happy for your clients to take your images, digital images, and to print them out themselves, say in Boots or any other shop?
Well, yes, I mean there is this thing nowadays where a lot more clients want the digital images as opposed to an album. So the market has changed somewhat. If they decide that they want the digital images, they can purchase the digital images. So that does then allow them to print from them. So they can actually go and print from them themselves, yes.
Now, I love going to weddings, even when it's people I don't know particularly well. So my wife's really got an invite, and I've got an invite as her plus one. Yeah. And I always had a great time at the weddings. Yeah. I love the speeches, I like the atmosphere, the clothes. It's always much fun. You've been to hundreds of weddings. You're so fortunate. Which is your sort of favourite part generally of the day?
I think it's essential for me to get into a wedding day by going to the bride's prep. Now, there are some brides that don't necessarily want that photographing, but for me, that really gives me a sense of how the bride is feeling when I go to bride's prep. So although I get there and I photograph the details first, the dress, the shoes, flowers, jewellery, things like that, when you arrive, you can sort of sense whether or not a bride is calm or stressed or well organised, and that tends to have an influence for the rest of the day. So if someone is stressed, I do like to think that I've got a calming influence on proceedings. So bride's prep for me, I can speak to the bride, and I can sort of help alleviate those nerves. I think she feels much more comfortable knowing that I'm there, rather than wondering whether or not I am there if I was just simply to turn up to the ceremony.
So each wedding, is what I think what you're saying, has its own vibe, its own character, and no two weddings are almost the same. And my reading of what you're saying is you use your skills and your calming, sensible way, which comes across so beautifully in this podcast, to determine where you're going to be, how you're going to do it, and perhaps the words that you use with the bride and groom in particular. Is that right?
Absolutely, yes. What can often happen, a wedding day can be quite, it's going to, the bride and groom are going to be naturally nervous, and it might be a nice feeling of nervousness, but still somewhat apprehensive. And I like to think that my calming influence can help them just relax a little. You know, if a bride's thinking, crikey, we're running late, we need to get to the ceremony and what have you, my feeling is, well, they're not going to start without you.
Yeah.
Take your
the
time.
centre of attention.
Absolutely. You've waited not just months, but probably years for this moment. You've got to make sure it's right. Take your time, take it all in. A wedding day goes so very quickly. It's quite amazing how fast it goes. You need to just take that time and take it all in, and it doesn't matter if you're 20 minutes late to the ceremony. It will still happen, it will still go ahead, they'll still wait for you, but don't worry about it.
Yes, you're very privileged to have been there for those hundreds of times, for those very special day, and shared it with the couple. Yeah. I remember you telling me before we started this podcast, just in conversation, how close you become very quickly to the couple.
Yeah.
and how you also admitted, and I think you would admit on air, that it's an intense, brilliant relationship, and then suddenly it's over.
Yes.
When it must be so sad when that
Yeah,
you hand
it
the
is.
album over and it's goodbye. I may see you, I may not. Good luck.
Yeah, it is. It's quite emotional, really. It is one of the most important days in a couple's lives, if not the most important. And yeah, it can be very emotional to a point. You do. From my point of view, I get to spend this most amazing time with a couple. I've met them beforehand in the preparation for the wedding. Spend the day with them on the wedding day, and which it can also have times where it's emotional. And one of the times, certainly for me, is often with the speeches. Father of the bride's speech will have me feeling quite emotional.
It does to me as well.
Yeah, but yes, when it comes down to it. At the end, you've spent this. You've got to know a couple really, really well, and when they come and collect the album, it can be quite emotional for the couple, and emotional for me because there's no sort of real reason to stay in touch. You know, you've gone through this emotional time with them and this amazing time with them, and then they've come to collect their album, and that's it. Now, Facebook and social media has helped to keep in touch with people. So I do find out when people move house. I find out when they have the first child, and that's fantastic to be able to keep in touch in that way. Yeah, it's quite an emotional time. And another particularly emotional time is when I receive a thank you card. Oh, crikey, some of them.
You see welling up now.
Yeah. It really, yeah, it does. It just, you get a lump in your throat and you think, wow, I've made a difference. I feel as though I've made a difference, and that's what, as daft as it may sound, that's what I wanted to do when I set up as a wedding photographer. I wanted to make a difference to people's lives, and if I've had such a positive influence on their special day, then wow, I'm quite emotional now.
I can see you getting choked
yeah.
now just talking about it. Now, I think people listening to this podcast, and perhaps those who are planning their wedding, they might think, well, I've got a friend who's a bit handy with a camera. It looks like he's got a big lens. He looks like he knows what he's doing. She knows what she's doing, etc. Yeah. There must be so many key moments on that day that if you don't know what you're doing and don't know what you're looking for example, the first kiss, the first dance, that you could ruin everyone's recollection of the wedding forever. Do you have any top tips for people looking for wedding photographers for their big day?
Yeah, absolutely. I think experience is one. I mean, there are so many photographers out there, really. The thing about a wedding photographer in particular is that certainly during times of austerity or times of recession, people look to supplement their income by doing something additional, but very often on a weekend. And photography is one of those things that people do as a hobby, and they may have a decent enough camera, and weddings are on a weekend. So, you know, some people think, well, why not photograph weddings on a weekend? Hand over the images for on disc or a USB stick for cash, and yeah, dead easy money. But actually, you're taking a big risk, really. I think if you're looking for a wedding photographer, first thing is to look at sort of experience, and also to look at what sort of training they've had. You may be very good at taking shots on a camera on automatic, and for the most part, 80% of the time, you'll get a really good shot. But if something changes, if something happens, let's say you're photographing the first dance, for example, and you've got your camera set up, you're all ready for the first dance, and then just as a couple are coming onto the dance floor, the DJ switches off the lights and puts on the disco lights. You may have anything from 2 minutes to even down to 30 seconds to get the shots that you need to get before that dance floor is then filled with other people. And if you don't know what you're doing with a camera, then yeah, you've missed that moment. And like you say, first kiss, if you're not prepared and know enough about weddings, things like first kiss you could quite easily miss. Well, actually, it's one of the most important moments, and especially placing the rings on each other's fingers. It's not one of those moments that you can recreate. So you know, an experienced photographer will know when that's going to happen and get themselves into a position to be able to capture that image.
I can imagine. Now, difficult subject, and Damian, tell the truth as you have so far. If you're planning a wedding, should you invite children? Discuss.
Well, it depends to some extent. I've been to some weddings where, I mean, children can absolutely make it. There are some amazingly cute children at weddings, and you can almost spend your time just photographing the kids. I mean, they can be absolutely adorable. When
I think there's a however
when they're not
coming.
adorable,
Yeah.
things can start to go awry, I suppose. But I've never, to be fair, I've never really had any major problems really. Occasionally during the ceremony, a child may play up, but you'll often find that the parents of that particular child will take them outside or whatever. But I've never really had any sort of particularly bad moments with children. But it's one of those things. I suppose only the couple can decide on that as to whether or not they want children at their wedding. Yeah.
I can believe it. Now, there's a lot of pressure. Imagine the most amount of pressure when it comes to wedding photography. But if you can do wedding photography and do it well, as you clearly do, then I imagine you could take your skill set and apply it to commercial events, award
Yes.
ceremonies and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
What sort of non-wedding-y type events do you photograph?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've talked about weddings because that is where I started in photography, and that's where a significant portion of my work has been in the past. But over the years, my work has evolved more in commercial photography, and one of them those areas is events. And yeah, if you can photograph a wedding and you can photograph a wedding well, you can pretty much photograph any event well, because you need to be really well prepared at a wedding. So anything like awards ceremonies, providing you're well organised and you know what's happening when, you can photograph any other event, I would say, fairly well. But things like award ceremonies, very often somebody will be awarded something. There may be several people that are brought up onto stage and awarded, a trophy or a certificate or whatever. And at that particular time, you've got to take a shot to make sure you capture that moment before that person then goes off stage. So you're very much in the limelight, I suppose, taking that shot. But you need to make sure you get it absolutely spot on. And again, this is one of those situations where the lighting might not be overly perfect to be able to do it, but you've still got to get that shot and make sure that shot is a good, clean shot, preferably a fantastic shot.
I bet.
Yeah.
And are you able to tell us who is the most famous person or sort of group of people that you've ever been asked to photograph?
Well, I've been very fortunate, I suppose, in my career. I've photographed quite a number of, I wouldn't say celebrities, well, I suppose celebrities, yes. And I've just happened to have been in the right place at the right time to have got those.
Not as a
particular
paparazzi
jobs.
with a long lens.
No. But I would say the two sort of main impressive moments, I would say, in my commercial photography career. One was photographing at both the Goodwood Festival of Speed and Revival Festival, and in particular the Revival Festival.
Where was the Revival Festival?
This is at Goodwood, Goodwood Racing Circuit, back in 2007. And I was one of 5 photographers who was given a pass to be allowed to stand on the circuit as cars were lining up ready to set off and race. And so right in front of me, with loads of people around, Sterling Moss in what must have been a priceless Aston Martin, and he was right there, and for me that was just one of the most amazing moments. And I ended up stood in the centre of the track with one other photographer as the 2 lines of cars set off for their warm-up lap. And even now, the vibration, it's something. It's just a feeling of unbelievable. How on earth did I manage to get myself into this position? This is absolutely amazing. And at the same event, I ended up being in a press conference on the front row with Jackie Stewart, and I just don't know how I managed to do that.
I'm sensing you're quite a petrol head, is that fair to say?
To some extent. I like classic cars in particular. But I suppose my other one was I photographed Deacon Blue at a private party, a 40th birthday party. And as close as I am to you, I was photographing Deacon Blue, and I was even allowed to go on stage, which is unheard of, and it all had to be approved by the bouncers and this, that and the other. But I ended up on stage with Deacon Blue, at this private party with 80 guests, and to me that was just absolutely amazing. I was supposed to finish that night at I think it was 12:30, and I didn't leave till 2:15 in the morning because I was just, I couldn't leave. It was just amazing.
I can see you're buzzing still now about it.
Amazing. Yeah.
Now, following on from sort of the commercial events that you would have photographed, you also photograph interiors, I think you'd right to say.
Yes.
Now, for me, non-photographer, I would have thought photographing kitchens and maybe bathrooms and things like that must be a little bit boring. Tell me why I am wrong.
Well, to some extent you could say it could be boring to some. But actually the standard and quality of interiors that I've got to now in my career photographing is such that I've photographed some really, really impressive interiors, and the clients that I work for will get me photographing interiors all over the country, and those clients want everything to be absolutely perfect, and I think it's my attention to detail that I really enjoy photographing interiors. I can take my time over it. It's not like photographing for estate agents where interiors are you're photographing a property and you've probably got 3/4 of an hour to photograph the entire property. Photographing interiors, you can take 2 hours, 4 hours to photograph a kitchen to get everything that you need just right to photograph that kitchen, because it's going to be used on billboards, it's going to be used in really impressive brochures, and it might even be used on TV. There's a TV advert at the moment for one of my clients, and although most of that is video, there are 3 images at the end that are photographs that I've taken. So,
and are you able to tell if you had a load of images of a lot of bathrooms, could you pick out and say, yes, that is DJB photography imagery?
So. I think
okay,
so.
what would set that apart then?
I think for me, a lot of it's to do with the angle that I take it from, and I can tell down to the quality and the angle. Now interiors, a lot of people that aren't used to photographing interiors, the verticals won't be straight. Now it may seem strange, but verticals are straight up and down, but when you photograph an interior stood at your normal height and you take a shot of an interior, the majority of the detail is actually below you, so you're photographing slightly down, so you'll find that the verticals are on angles, and interior photography, you need to make sure those verticals are absolutely dead straight. But for me, I think it's the quality and the angle at which I take the image, and the fact that all my verticals are straight, and the fact that there are details in all the highlights and the dark areas that I can certainly tell that that's an image that I've taken.
And no bridezillas to
no
to throw you
or
me.
At all. It's a much more controlled environment, I must admit, photographing an interior. You've got usually more time in which to compose a shot and take a shot.
So Damian, tell me about any of the awards that you've had, because a little bird tells me that you've received some awards again.
Yes.
Go on.
Well, I once again won the Best of House 2018 award. Now, House is the leading online website for homeowner.
That's HOUZE.
HOUZZ.
Oh, ZZ, okay, sure.
And that's a homeowner sort of interior design website where homeowners find professionals, interior professionals online, and based on my photography and the quality of my photography and how popular my photography has been on there, as once again, yes, I've won the 2018 award for that, so I'm very pleased with that. It's the 3rd year in a row, so
congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you.
Our own Damian. I knew you were the right person to have as the very first person on the Harrogate podcast. Now, moving sort of in a similar direction, I understand that there are a few sort of groupings for professional photographers. Tell us about those associations and which one, if all of them or any of them that you're in.
Well, there are several photographic organisations, and for me personally, I think 3 of them have got some credibility, and these 3 are really sort of in my area of photography. So the first one is the Royal Photographic Society, which has been around for an awful long time, and I've been a member of that since 2005, and also the Society of Wedding and Portrait Photographers, which is very much dedicated to, obviously, wedding photographers. And so those are two that I'm a member of. The third one is the Master Photographers Association. And all of these organisations have various different levels you can achieve, from a basic member to a licentiate to an associate to a fellow, and based on having your work assessed. And back in 2005 I achieved associateship. So very early on in my photographic career I achieved associateship for both the Royal Photographic Society and the Society of Wedding and Portrait Photographers, which is quite high up really. And I must admit, I've not actually gone for my fellowship, but I should do. I really should.
Thank you, Damian. Going back to wedding photography, if I may, what should people be looking for when it comes to selecting the venue in terms of how it will pan out with the photography? Is it that the venue is the venue and the photographer will make the most of it and sort the lighting out and tart up the image using Photoshop after the event? Or is it just some venues should be left alone because the photography emanating from that event is just frankly going to be poor because of lighting issues or what have you? What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are that the nicer the venue initially in terms of how picturesque it is, the easier it is from my point of view, to be quite honest.
I thought you might say.
Yeah. But there are certain venues I could highly recommend. Venues are a very sort of personal thing, but we're very, very fortunate in and around the Harrogate area to have some very, very amazing venues.
Tell me some of the venues around Harrogate and North Yorkshire that you have. Maybe it's all of them, but just give me your favourite bits of the...
Some of the best ones I personally feel are Goldsborough Hall, Allerton Castle, Ripley Castle, Hazelwood Castle, the Old Swan Hotel in Harrogate. There are lots of them. Rudding Park, really, there are lots of them. It depends on the style of wedding that you're actually looking for and the number of guests. So somewhere like Allerton Castle is very unique. It's very Gothic styled. It will appeal to some people, it won't appeal to others. It can cater for a lot of people, so if you've got 120 plus, it can cater for that number of people. Unfortunately, the downside to Allerton is that there's no overnight accommodation other than for the bride and groom and possibly the bride's parents. You get somewhere like Goldsborough Hall. It's much more intimate venue, extremely picturesque. The couple who own that, Claire and Mark, they're constantly developing that property to make it even more impressive, and it really is a lovely venue. But to me, it's nicer for slightly smaller wedding parties, probably 100 less, really, to be honest. But the grounds are fantastic, and the actual place itself is just beautiful. It does very much come down to people's personal preference, but like I say, there's plenty of venues in the area.
And given how many weddings you photographed at, surely you must be giving a lot of advice actually to the couple themselves as to perhaps where they want to have their happy day. Or is it sort of after the events they come to you and say, Damian, we've chosen this event, and you say, okay, fine, I've been there before, I know what I'm doing. Have they missed a trick in actually not engaging you earlier in the process, do you think?
Possibly, yeah. I mean, I do tend to, if I ever get the opportunity to speak to a couple prior to them actually choosing a venue, then I will recommend places, and I'll ask them about what they like and what they don't like, in order to be able to recommend certain places. And also, if people go onto my blog and actually search for a particular venue, they will often find I've photographed one, if not several, weddings at that particular venue, so they can get an idea of what sort of feel that they're likely to get from their own wedding. But yeah, for the most part, anybody that contacts me, for the most part, has already actually got the date sorted out. They've got the wedding venue and the date, and it's the things like the photographer and those other things that get booked up, and once they're booked, that's it. So like I can't photograph another wedding once I'm booked for a particular date, whereas a florist could probably do flowers for several weddings on a particular date. So it's people like me that get a sort of next on the list after they've chosen a wedding date and venue. So there's only really a small window of opportunity when couples are actually looking for a photographer that, you know, if anybody hears of anybody getting married or recently engaged, There's only really a small window of opportunity before somebody actually then goes ahead and books a wedding photographer.
So Damian, you clearly adore photography. You're just pouring out of all your veins. I can just see it here, the way you talk about it. Your face is lighting up. You clearly love what you do.
Yeah.
You're very lucky. It's probably also a hobby of yours in a sense. I imagine when you're going away on holiday abroad, for example, you're taking your camera and you're going somewhere that you want to take some shots. If you go abroad, where's the place that budding photographers should go to get those great shots?
Well, this is where I think, rather than if you are a budding photographer, rather than just simply choosing to photograph landscapes or photograph people or photograph buildings, if you want to stimulate your creativity, try thinking about a particular theme. When I sort of photograph for myself, I try and choose a theme and then concentrate on that theme. So, for example, if you think of the word power, or you think of the word flight as two examples, and you concentrate on those, and you go for a walk, with that in mind, think about what it is you're photographing. So if you want to, and it's difficult at the moment possibly to even consider what you would actually take when it's related to power, but actually there are times you'd walk down the road and you may really struggle with it, but the next day you'd walk down the road and within 100 yards you could have taken 100 photographs all related to power. Now for me, picturesque places, I mean one of the most picturesque places I thought was Tuscany in Italy. I mean the historic towns there are just amazing, and you can't fail to get fantastic imagery because the weather's beautiful and it is very beautiful. But then in contrast, Budapest, I mean the architecture there is amazing, but you can get some really interesting, very creative, artistic shots that aren't nice, beautiful landscapes. They're just very moody, very interesting images and I quite like that. I quite like taking images in black and white, and there's something quite timeless about black and white.
Damian, which photographers inspire you? The only one I can think of is David Bailey, but I'm sure there are hundreds of them. Any household names, and if they do inspire you, what is it that they do that us lay people should appreciate?
Well, there are actually three photographers who really inspired me, and really I suppose I found out about two of them at college more than anything. And these are two photographers from that you'd class as sort of like traditional photographers, that they are photographers from way back when photography was very much film related and black and white, and that's Ansel Adams and Henri Cartier-Bresson. And there's something really interesting about their work. They could photograph the most mundane thing and make it really interesting to the point that you'd stop and look at that image and you'd concentrate on it for ages, because there was a depth to it and there was something really unique about it. And again, I see traditional photographers used to take a lot of time over composing a shot. So you'd look at photographs from Victorian times, and when you look at photographs from Victorian times, they are very set and composed. That some time has been taken over that photograph to take that shot, to make sure the verticals are straight, to make sure the background isn't cluttered, to make it a really interesting, pleasing image. Because a lot of photographs that are taken nowadays are just very, very quick snaps, people taking them on iPhones. So those are two that really sort of inspired me.
You mentioned a third. Who's the third?
Yeah, the third one is a guy called Martin Shembry, who's an Australian wedding photographer. And actually, I got to hear him talk at a seminar years and years and years ago, and I liked his style. Now, in Australia, the style of wedding photography is very different to here. That they can take the couple away. It's very much sort of accepted that the couple will spend 4 or 5 hours away on a wedding day doing a photo shoot.
That's crazy.
It is, and it doesn't happen in this country. You can't do it in this country. In this country, it would be unacceptable, to be honest. But yeah, over there, they take them away for 4 or 5 hours, and we'll do all these setup shots and pose shots and sort of fashion related shots. But I did find his style really interesting, and actually I try and incorporate some of what I picked up from him into my wedding photography. Now, I tried to do some things, and in my wedding photography after I'd seen him, and the first couple of weddings I felt really uncomfortable, and then I had to have a real sit down and think about what it was about my style and what I thought wedding photography was about, to then get myself back on track to think, no, actually I think a wedding should be photographed in this particular way. But I did pick up a lot of things from him in terms of his style, and I do like his style, and I do like the way in which he talks to brides and the couple, and the way in which he photographs the wedding. I just can't take the couple away for 5 hours, that's all.
You wouldn't have a business
No.
if you'd done that, I'm
No.
sure. My wife, for one, I don't think would have been very pleased.
No.
Now, for budding photographers who might be listening to the show, perhaps they go GCSE, stage, A-levels, university, none of those things, are in different jobs. And maybe they're thinking, like you, they're in a job that they were doing well at, but it quite wasn't their calling. What tips would you have for those photographers who want to make it a go as a professional photographer, as you so successfully have done?
I would say, one, try and get some work experience with a photographer, and also I would say that training is essential, simply so that you do fully understand how a camera works and how light interacts with the camera, so that you can actually cope with any situation that you come across. Because if you can't, you'll come across a situation and you'll photograph something and the client won't be happy. And you want to make sure that you not only meet a client's expectations, but you exceed them. And I think really training is therefore absolutely essential. But if you can get some work experience with a photographer, then I would very much encourage you to do that.
Now, Damian, we're coming to the end of the podcast. Can I say I've learned so much about photography. I've learnt a lot about you. I've known you for some years, but the things that you have said in this interview, the emotion that you clearly have, and adoration for your line of work, is just gorgeous to hear. And I'm really looking forward to the feedback we get from this interview. Damian, thank you so much for coming in today. It's been an absolute privilege getting to know you in a far more detailed way than I did previously. There's so much to your job that I just simply hadn't countenanced before. I never really appreciated the stress that a wedding photographer is on the day. And thank you for enlightening me on these subjects. Now, for those people listening, if they want to get in touch with you, how best should they get in touch with you?
Well, probably the best way is my website, which is www.djbphotography.com. I do have a Facebook page, DJB Photography, or Twitter, that's Damian Bramley, D-A-M-I-A-N.
Super. Damian, thank you very much. I wish you all the best for the future. Good luck.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Andrew.